That Triathlon Show, episode 50. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to a special episode of That Triathlon Show, our 50th episode. It's gone really fast. I started this podcast back at the end of February of this year, 2017, and we're already up to 50 episodes. So, wow, this has been really great, really fun, and I hope that you have enjoyed it as much as I have. I, of course, am your host, Michael, as always, and this podcast is presented by scientifictriathlon.com. So, for this special episode, it's going to be a different format compared to normally, and I hope it will turn out well. There are quite a few bits and pieces that need to come together here because I'm actually recording from a different quote-unquote studio today. I'm visiting my families, so I don't have my quite regular setup, and I'm also doing quite a lot of, let's say, cutting and clipping of previous audio nuggets from other episodes. So I hope it turns out good, but we'll see. I think that the content, as always, will be really good. Some audio editing stuff might leave something to be desired. If you are an audio editor and you'd like to help me out for free, then you're welcome to send me an email to michael@scientifictriathlon.com. But anyways, I think that this will be really great. We will have highlights from the previous 49 episodes, the best of the best in terms of advice, tips, tools, and tactics from a whole host of fantastic guests that have been on the show so far, and maybe some of my own really good tips that I've shared on this podcast. Then there will be some hidden gems. I'll list some of the more unconventional or unknown pieces of advice that have come up as well. Plus, as you know, I always ask my guests a few rapid-fire questions, and usually at least a couple of those remain the same from episode to episodes, and some patterns have started to emerge. So I will tell you a little bit about those patterns very briefly. What are the best resources, books, tools, favorite pieces of equipment, and so on of all of the That Triathlon Show guests. Then I'll again very briefly talk a bit about our most popular episodes, so you can already start guessing at which episodes do you think are the most popular so far in the history of That Triathlon Show. So I'll talk about that, a little bit of stats for you. And finally, I'll give you a little teaser for what's coming up in the near-term and long-term future for That Triathlon Show. One thing about my studio setup that I forgot to mention, that I wanted to mention, is that I'm actually sitting down. I usually stand up recording because I have a standing desk at my home, but I don't have that today. And I don't know, I find it quite difficult to be engaging when I sit down. So if I end up sounding a bit boring, then that might be why. It's certainly not because I am bored, because I'm having a really good time here. I have a 2-week vacation, and I had my last day as a full-time engineer last Friday, so that would have been the 11th of August, and I'm recording on the 15th. So that's great. Before we dive into the main segments for today, remember that you can always send me feedback and questions, and I'm especially curious about what you think about this episode. So send that to michael@scientifictriathlon.com, and that's Michael with a K, or tweet me at @scitriat. And final call to action before actually starting with this episode. Now that That Triathlon Show is 50 episodes old and has been coming out consistently every Monday and Thursday for 25 weeks or so, I don't have my calculator and I don't want to calculate in my head. No, just kidding. It is 25 weeks. You probably realize that it's here to stay, and I'll do everything I can to constantly keep improving it. That's why I always ask for feedback. But if you haven't already, make sure that you subscribe to the podcast and go to the archive if you haven't listened to all the previous episodes and look them up, because there's some real gold down in the archives. And about the audio quality of some of the earlier episodes, it's a bit sketchy at points, and I'm still learning a lot about that part of podcasting. it will keep improving, and I hope it's been getting better and better, and that's what I aim to improve even more in the future. So yeah, that's that. So all right, now let's not waste any more time. Let's start with some highlights from previous episodes.
Sure. I would say if we talk about a philosophy of periodization that makes it very simple for everybody, the philosophy is that the closer in time you come to your race, the more like the race your training should become.
That was Joe Friel from episode 1, and he talked about periodization of triathlon training. And the reason that I added this segment to this episode is that many athletes start to unconsciously second-guessing their training plan the closer that they get to a race, and start throwing together workouts that they find in magazines or on forums or even on podcasts randomly in search of a magic bullet workout that is going to make them a lot fitter. And that's obviously not the way that you should do it. In many ways, planning your training becomes much easier the closer you get to your race, because you can just try to simulate your race in training, and the training will start to emulate the race demands. So for example, if you're targeting an Olympic distance race, a key bike workout might be 6 times 10 minutes at race intensity with a few minutes of recovery between each repetition, assuming that you're shooting for closer to a 1 hour bike split. So again, the closer in time you get to your race, the more like your race your training should become. In episode 3, we had Jerry Rodriguez, who is a great triathlon swim coach, on, and he talked about the 3 foundational elements that will make you swim faster. Let's hear from Jerry.
If I can nail down these 3 things, body tautness, which is really structural presence, alignment of the frame, which is holding the frame in a straight line, head, chest, belly button, pelvis, knees, ankles, dead straight line, and then how to go about generating propulsion, which will give us velocity, right? If we can nail those 3 things down, and I can present that in the most simplistic way, I think we can get almost everybody to swim relatively fast.
All right, so there you had it. You had tautness, alignment, and propulsion as the 3 foundational elements. And funnily enough, I just got back from the pool where I first had my own workout, and after that I was actually coaching my mom because she's getting into triathlon, and I was showing her a few basic things about freestyle swimming and trying to coach her to swim faster. And we focused completely on tautness and just a little bit on stroke timing, but mainly on tautness this entire lesson. And if you would have seen the difference between her first 25 meter and her last 25 meter, it was like night and day just by learning how to use tautness in swimming. And Jerry's teachings have helped me a lot with these 3 elements as well, and getting from, I don't know, a 2:30 pace per 100 meter pace when I started swimming to now swimming a solid minute 1:30 or so faster regularly in my intervals. And just to briefly recap what these things are, you can go to episode 3 to learn more. By the way, Joe Friel was in episode 1. But tautness is to engage your body, keep it active. An analogy would be an uncooked spaghetti straw versus a cooked spaghetti straw. So you have some structural integrity to your body. And alignment is to make stroke advice really simple and understandable from your hand entry to the very end until through your stroke. Keep your hand in the channel that's formed by a line projected from your shoulder, and the second line that's the center of your body. So in that channel between that center line and the shoulder line, you should keep your hand throughout the stroke from hand entry to exit. Simple, not easy. And finally, propulsion. Jerry puts it very eloquently: grip it and rip it. Keep your wrist firm and don't pet the kitty, as Jerry says. And with these 3 things, you can make a lot of improvements if you just focus on these 3 simple foundational elements. In episode 4, Wendy Mader, triathlon coach, talked a lot about what beginners should think about when starting out in triathlon. And in this segment, she talks about how to make triathlon a lifestyle and the importance of it. Let's hear from Wendy.
I think, first and foremost, enjoy it. It's a lifestyle. I mean, obviously for me, it's a lifestyle 25 years later, but don't get caught up. If you're first getting started, don't get caught up in all the technology stuff that you can purchase. And some people are motivated by that, but I think you really, really enjoy the lifestyle of swimming, biking, and running. And a lot of times that gets you healthy with your nutrition and your mental state of mind as well.
So that one, as I said, was more for beginners, and I highly, highly recommend episode 4 for any beginner listening to this. And I do plan to get more episodes specifically for beginners done in the future. I've been not too good at that so far, and that's something that I'm very much aware of. So I'm working on that, and please send me suggestions and feedback for what you beginners want as well. And just one short point I want to make for any beginner triathlete out there, based on a recent email conversation I had with a listener, is don't get overwhelmed and think that you have to get all the latest gears and gadgets, as Wendy said. And equally important, don't think that you have to train a lot. You can make triathlon a lifestyle by swimming, biking, and running even just once per week in each discipline, and you can finish a sprint triathlon on that training easily. It's just about being consistent, not necessarily about training a whole lot. You don't need to do that. Train to the level that you want to keep it fun. And in this next segment, I keep taking a lot of highlights from earlier episodes because I think that a lot of you have listened to all the recent episodes. But episode 7, Jim Vance, and the importance of being confident on the start line and how to become confident.
I can tell you most people think that I'm just all about numbers and data, but really I would say my bias as a coach is in the mentality of my athletes. Being confident on the start line is probably the number one predictor of race performance. If the athlete is excited to race on the start line, confident and pumped up, ready to go, they're likely to have a great race. And data is what I find helps eliminate all the subjectivity of training and makes it more objective so athletes can see that they're successful, gain confidence from that, gain a sense of fulfillment from all the training they're doing. And that in the end is what I believe really leads to performance in races.
And I couldn't agree more with Jim. And in an upcoming episode with Patrick Cohn, we'll talk about ways in which you can be proactive about building confidence. Jim talks about using data for that, knowing that you've done the work based on the data and that you have done it right. That's one way, definitely, of being confident and getting to the start line confident. A tip that I'll add is that something that I do for my races is I review my most successful recent workouts before every race. I really look at the training file and think about how I felt during that workout. If it was a great track session or a fantastic swim that I had, it puts me in a confident state of mind, which makes me ready to perform. The next segment is from Matt Dixon from episode 13, The Pillars of Performance.
But in support of that swimming and cycling and running, for an athlete to be successful, there has to be emphasis, intent, and focus on recovery as a component of it. And that's a broad subject in itself. Strength and conditioning, really, really important, particularly important for amateur athletes, I would say, although every one of my professional athletes incorporates strength and conditioning. And then the big bucket of nutrition, which includes fueling the calories consumed during and immediately following workouts, hydration, of course, during and outside of workouts, and your daily platform of eating.
And I think that already said it all. The point here is, of course, that if you're even semi-serious about improving as a triathlete, then you can't isolate swimming, biking, and running. You need to consider and be particular about recovery, nutrition, and strength and conditioning as well. And this isn't just for the top age groupers. This is really for everyone. And this episode with Matt, episode 13, is one of the first episodes I would recommend any triathlete to listen to, of all my 49 episodes, by the way. So if you haven't listened to it in its entirety, go ahead and do so. Now let's listen to a segment from one of my solo episodes, from episode 16 on intensity versus volume. If you're a beginner, you should focus mostly on increasing your volume by increasing the frequency of workouts. Do more workouts. They don't need to be too long. Just do a bit more than you've been doing now by increasing more workouts. If you're an intermediate triathlete and you don't train too much and you have time and to train more than you do at the moment, the total volume, then you can increase the volume. You can add a couple of workouts, but primarily you should increase the duration of your workout. So if most of us are time constrained and you're already at your limit of what you can do, so that's when starting to do high intensity training really comes into play and becomes your path to performance improvement. And for advanced triathlete, if you have a VO2 max of 65 or above, definitely you need to include about 20% or 10 to 20% of your training should be the kind of high intensity workouts that you really try to smash. And I think that also speaks for itself pretty much. So let's move into another segment. This one too is a solo episode. I get a lot of questions about how to train for masters athletes to minimize the performance decline that comes with age. So much so that in episode 20, I did an entire episode on it. And here you'll hear me explain what the main reason for performance decline with age is. The reduction in performance and decline in performance is associated most closely with direct reductions in exercise, volume, and intensity, and probably as a consequence of changes in a number of both physical and behavioral factors. For example, increased prevalence to injuries for masters athletes and reductions in energy perhaps, and time and motivation to train, a lot of social obligations, etc., etc. And of course, this is not to say that decline won't happen, but in many cases, a lot of what we'd naturally want to blame age for might just be your own training. So it might be something that you can change in your training that will greatly reduce the reduction that you see. All right, next segment is from episode 26, High Performance Coaching with Paulo Sousa, and he discusses the wrong things that some coaches may focus on.
I think there's a lot of focus on what sessions to do, what kind of training to do, what's the right amount of intensity, what's the right amount of volume, and about the planning, just having a plan and following it. The more you're bogged down to today, we need to do this session, or to think about training as just like the key session, the magical sessions that we have to have.
And I included this segment here because this is definitely true for coaches, but it's also true for self-coach athletes, which a lot of you guys listening are. So there's certainly a big difference between coaching and programming, which is what Polo kind of alludes to here. Just having a training plan and getting a training plan is not getting coached or coaching. So if you're getting coaching, you're getting interaction, feedback, and an objective review of your training. You don't get just workouts on a piece of paper or on a data screen or whatever. So always keep the big picture in mind. That is so important. And I like the way that Cody Beals put it in episode 11 when we talked about self-coaching. Put on your coach's hat when you're coaching yourself or self-coaching, and put on your athlete's hat when you're in execution mode and need to execute your training, and keep those roles separate. In episode 31, we talked with John and Chris Fornham of Flow Cycling. The episode is titled How to Shave 14 Minutes Off Your Ironman Bike Split, and in this segment, we'll break down exactly how to do that. Wow, so you're saying that it's around about, was it 4 minutes for each wheel and then 3 minutes for each tire when you upgrade from the standard set that you get with your bike? Was that how it breaks down?
Roughly. So yeah, if you took the scenarios that I gave, you're roughly 4 per tire and about 3 per wheel. So it's a significant savings. You look at people who are trying to make Kona, who are trying to actually qualify, 14 minutes on just the bike segment alone.
So what we're talking about there is obviously aerodynamic savings and also rolling resistance savings from having the right tire. And of note, neither I nor John nor Chris said that it has to be Flow wheels. There are a lot of other wheels that offer very similar time savings, and Flow has done that analysis as well. Probably not at the same price point as Flow offers, though. There are other good tires as well, in addition to the Continental GP Force 24mm that John and Chris recommended. But so you can see episode 31 for all the details. That being said, with all the right gear and equipment, nothing replaces a great bike fit, as the rider accounts for the vast majority of aerodynamic drag anyway. So this should be your first action step, way before even considering buying any expensive gear. And John and Chris agree. They talked about that in episode 31 as well. And to learn even more about aerodynamics, equipment, and bike fits, I also recommend listening to episodes 25, Aerodynamics Mastery and Free Speed on the Bike with Nuno Placeres, and episode 47, Virtual Wind Tunnel with Andrew Buckrell and Michael Lieberson. Now, for this highlights section, the final segment that I want to play is from another one of my absolute favorite interviews that I've done to date with Jesse Kropelnicki on fueling and hydration. And especially for long course triathletes, this is one of the must listen to episodes that I've done. So let's hear Jesse Kropelnicki.
We've worked with probably 2,000 to 3,000 athletes developing detailed race fueling plans. So we have seen everything you could possibly imagine, from high sweat rate people, low sweat rate people, to high salt sweaters, to low salt sweaters. You name it. I've probably worked with somewhere in the vicinity of 70 professional triathletes on their race fueling. And I can tell you right now that it is the number one limiter in long course racing. The biggest changes we make with athletes fueling are to make sure that they're getting enough fluid and sodium. Most athletes drastically underestimate the requirements in those two areas. What's an easy way for an athlete that's racing a half Ironman event or an Ironman event to make sure that they're drinking enough? It's pretty simple. You need to make sure you pee at least once in half Ironman on the bike, and you need to make sure you pee at least twice in Ironman on the bike. If you don't do those two things in those races, then you are not going to perform to your potential. Most athletes, their primary limiter on race day is their ability to handle what their body requires. And athletes don't seem to get that. They think just because their body requires a certain amount of carbohydrate, a certain amount of sodium, a certain amount of fluid, that they're magically just going to be able to handle it. And nothing could be further from the truth. Those athletes that have a higher sweat rate many times need to spend a year training their gut to actually be able to handle what their body requires.
Now, I'm all for getting the basics right and the fundamentals right first. And I think that most of these topics that I picked up in the first part of this episode are more or less about different fundamentals of the sport, whether it be training, recovery, nutrition, and even equipment. They all have something to do with the fundamentals on different levels, but still. But in this next section, I will pick out some hidden gems from some of our episode, less known, more unconventional things that we've heard on different interviews or in solo episodes as it pertains to triathlon training and racing. One of them, I realize now in hindsight, is not so much unconventional, but I just started to see a pattern come up and I wanted to include that. But you'll see about what that is in just a little bit. But first, let's start with a segment from episode 17, Brain Training and Psychobiology of Endurance Performance with Professor Samuele Marcora.
So in a study we did we published the year before, we induced muscle fatigue by doing 100 drop jumps before doing the cycling test. This pre-fatiguing of the locomotor muscle induced a reduction in performance as you would expect. But what was fascinating is that mental fatigue caused a very similar reduction. So whether you have a tired mind or whether you have tired legs, the effect is the same. When you go on the bike or running or whatever, we also did the study we haven't published on swimming, is that the effect is the same. The same pace feels harder, and therefore you will reach the point at which you feel that you have given your maximal effort earlier than in the condition that we call it control condition, where you do the same endurance test without pre-fatigue, either muscular or mental.
So I find that pretty incredible that the reduction in endurance performance caused by mental pre-fatigue from a computerized task was similar or identical to the reduction caused by 100 drop jumps. Just goes to show you how important the mental side of things is in endurance sports. The next segment is from episode 36 called Cooldowns, Are They Necessary? Let's hear whether they are. So just to wrap up the conclusions for this episode, there's not much in favor of doing cooldowns in terms of evidence-based research. The only thing that has been proven is that it reduces the risk of being dizzy or fainting if you stop to a dead still. So try not to do that, stop to a dead still, but walk around for a couple of minutes after you stop your workouts. And that, again, is pretty self-explanatory, and that this is something that, again, I've been starting to apply more and more in the workouts of the athletes that I coach, because they are all time-crunched athletes, and if they have an hour, then I'd rather spend an extra 10 minutes on the warm-up or even the main set rather than the cool-down. So this is very practical information that I hope that you start to apply and not take cool-downs for granted and take it at face value that you have to do them. All right, this next gem that I have is not so much unconventional, but it's unconventional in the sense that many don't adhere to this. So I'll play a few clips from many, many different episodes. So you'll hear in turn Mary Beth Ellis, Brad Stolberg, Joe Friel, Matt Dixon, Cody Beals, and Chad Timmerman talk about this topic that I want you to really take away.
I think a priority should be sleep. And that's something that I try to stress with my athletes is that, you're not going to get in the quality training session if you're skimping on sleep all the time. So I think sometimes it's better to opt to skip that training and make sure you're getting enough sleep.
Sleep. We don't get nearly enough sleep. When I was coaching, I required the athletes I coach to get a lot of sleep every night. And what does that mean? What's a lot of sleep? That means they would wake up without an alarm clock.
The number one recovery tool that you have, and it's free, is sleep.
I would say taking recovery as seriously as the workouts. So a lot of age groupers, I train with some of them, are fantastic about smashing workouts. Not so great about, respecting their bedtime or having a nap or something like that, or practicing good nutrition during the day. So that's equally as important.
Another, and it's certainly not a new topic, but is emphasis on the quality of sleep. And we're trying to find ways to basically maximize our recovery during that very specific downtime during sleep.
All right, and I made a mix-up there. Brad Stolberg was not in that clip. It was Mary Beth Ellis from episode 32, Joe Friel from episode 1, Matt Dixon, episode 13, Cody Beals, episode 11, and Chad Timmerman, episode 38. And I think that clip, it's a pattern. These are not the only ones that have been talking about sleep, but I think that those should be enough to convince you that you really need to catch your C's, or you're cutting yourself short on sleep. The next segment, and this is again more of an unconventional hidden gem, is related to recovery or measuring recovery. It's heart rate variability. And in episode 42, we had Dan Plews on to talk about HRV, and let's hear what Dan had to say.
So we devised ways where we would look at baseline measures for that individual, and we'd establish ways to measure that baseline, and then we'd look at how those rolling averages would respond over a training block. Yeah, so you'd see basically you would see increase in that, an increasing trend. So if you look at the rolling average over a 7-day period, and you're doing a good block of training, and you're actually making some good adaptations to that training, you would really see it increase and go above the kind of your threshold zones for your normal baseline.
So as we talked about on that episode 42 with the Plews, I am using HRV myself, using the HRV for Training app. And I have to preface this by saying that I'm very curious and like to try a lot of new things, but I only stick with the ones that I believe are really, and I mean really beneficial and can turn the needle for me. And HRV definitely is one of those things for me. I have been using it for well over 3 months now, I think. And I know that the more data that I get, the more important and beneficial it will become. And one thing that the Plews turned me on to was the fact that tracking the rolling average of the HRV and comparing that to your baseline, and seeing if the rolling average increases during a hard block of training is probably the most important thing that you should track within the realm of HRV. So that was news to me. And if you're interested in HRV, check out episode 42. And finally, the final hidden gem is from Brad Stolberg. This episode is also one of the ones that I would classify as my favorites. It's about peak performance, not just in triathlon, but also in life. And Brad talks about being an anti-hack guy, and I found that was really great and really applicable for triathlon. There's no silver bullet and no hacks. So let's hear what Brad has to say about that.
And I think, the other thing that I'll add in, because every opportunity to say this, I say it, there are no hacks. Like, nothing makes me more sick. There are a lot of books in this genre that talk about the hacks. So if you, like kind of mentioned earlier with the routine, but if you just take these supplements, or if you wear this weird electrical headband, or if you intermittently fast and sleep, like, no one of those things, not all of those things together are going to make you a better performer. Like, becoming better at anything is really, really hard, and it takes time, and the only way to do it is to embrace the journey. So I'm kind of like becoming the anti-hack person, but I think that that's okay.
Wow, I couldn't have said it better myself. Although we had a little bit of weird audio going on, I think that was a super important clip to include in this episode, because I'm such a big believer in what Brad just said there. Again, episode 28, highly recommended, one of the most downloaded episodes we have. And there's this saying that it takes a long time to become an overnight success. And nowhere is this as true as in triathlon. You can't hack your way there. You need to just chop wood and carry water, as Paulo Sousa also talked about in the interview that we did with him. Always remember that. All right, let's move on to some patterns that have been showing up in the rapid fire questions. What are the most liked and endorsed resources, books, blogs, or websites related to triathlon, the best, most favored gear or equipment for triathlon, and the most common habits amongst the guests of That Triathlon Show? Starting with resources, the question that I ask is, what's your favorite book, blog, or resource related to triathlon, or in some cases, to your field of expertise? And we have a joint winner here. It's the Slow Twitch website and forums, and the book Triathlon 2.0 by Jim Vance. Again, go to episode 7 to hear more about that. And honorable mentions to How Bad Do You Want It by Matt Fitzgerald, The Well-Built Triathlete by Matt Dixon, Triathlon Science, co-edited by Jim Vance and Joe Friel, Life of a Triathlete by Meredith Kessler, and Swim Smooth by Paul Newsome. That's a website and a book and a platform, so there are a lot of dimensions to that Swim Smooth. But again, Slow Twitch and Triathlon 2.0. For the question, what's your favorite piece of gear or equipment? We have a landslide victory for the power meter. It's got 6 counts versus 2 for the second place or second places. So not even going to mention the other ones. A power meter is by far the most liked piece of gear or equipment. And finally, the question, what's a personal habit that's helped you achieve success? Not surprisingly, the number one habit is consistency with 6 counts, and sleep is in second place with 4, and napping is third with 3. There's an overlap. Some people have said sleep and napping, and I counted them as separate, but that's those are the 3: consistency and sleep/napping. Now, what do you think have been the top episodes, the most downloaded episodes of That Triathlon Show so far? I'll give you the answer in just 2 seconds. I'll let you have those 2 seconds to think first. All right, time's up. Number 1 is episode number 1, Joe Friel, and his advice for improving your training structure and training periodization. Number 2 is, this is kind of a surprise to me. not based on the quality of the episode, but based on the topic. I didn't think that this would be so popular as it has been, but episode 17 with Samuele Marcora, Brain Training and Psychobiology of Endurance Performance. And episode number 3, I should say, the third most downloaded episode, is also a surprise to me, I think, based on the way I've taken this podcast with mostly coaches, researchers, and experts in their fields. The third most downloaded is with Cody Beals, so a pro triathlete, and it's called Master Ironman 70.3 Training with pro triathlete Cody Beals. But we also talk a lot about self-coaching there, so that may be the reason why that's so popular. And Cody is a fantastic guy, and we had a great chat, so it's not surprising that people like it when they have downloaded it. But obviously, when getting these download numbers, a lot of people look at who's the guest and what's the title, and that's how you decide if you are going to listen or not. And the fourth most downloaded is not a surprise to me, definitely not. It's episode number 3, 3 foundational elements that will make you swim faster with Jerry Rodriguez. And if you haven't listened to that, and especially if the swim is something you struggle with, this is a must listen. Together with episode number 1, Joe Friel, that was the most downloaded. And the 5th most downloaded is another must listen, I would say, Race Day Fueling and the Core Diet with Jesse Kropelnicki, episode number 40. So again, just to recap, Joe Friel, episode number 1, Samuele Marcora, episode 17, Cody Beals, episode 11, Jerry Rodriguez, episode number 3, and Jesse Kropelnicki, episode number 40. So, I hope that you have enjoyed this special episode of a different format than usual, with these different segments and clips and some stats and useful information from the history of the first 50 episode of That Triathlon Show. And now let me just talk a little bit about the future of the show, give you a little teaser on what's coming up. Of course, the show will keep going strong. It will only keep improving. That's why I always ask you to send me feedback to michael@scientifictriathlon.com. And that's Michael with a K. I will get more time to work on it when I transition to coaching full time and quitting my engineering day job and moving to Portugal in October. I'm so looking forward to that. And in the near future, even before that, we'll have great guests like Shauna Halson, who is a fantastic researcher on recovery from the Australian Institute of Sports, Patrick Cohn, who is one of the most well-known sports psychologists in the US, and he works with both a lot of triathletes, but also pro golfers and a lot of different sports. So he has so much knowledge, and I've done that interview already as the one with Shona, and both are great. So look forward to those. This week, from the 15th of August, I'm interviewing 3 other guests, Danielle Stefano. I'm really looking forward to that as well. She is an elite coach and has been to the Olympics in the capacity of a coach for the Australian Olympic team. David Tilbury Davis, who has been working with Cody Beals, Lionel Sanders, and a lot of other great guys, and he's known as one of the best in the field. And Gail Bernhardt, same for her. She has been to the Olympics as well. For the US Olympic team. So if you're well versed in the sport or just listening to me list those merits, you know that list includes some of the best in when it comes to coaches and researchers in the world of triathlon and endurance sports. And that's my goal and the goal of the show, to keep bringing excellent guests like this on, but not just the ones that you read about in every single magazine and hear on every single podcast. I want to uncover the gems like Shona and Patrick and Danielle, for example, that are not necessarily names that you've heard of before, but they're so fantastic, have so fantastic achievements to their name that they should be heard. And that's something that I really want to emphasize and do more of in the future. Do this journalistic digging and uncover these gems that we need to get out to the bigger audience and let's hear what they have to say. So I hope that is enough to convince you to stay with us and keep listening to the show. So yeah, essentially not just keep regurgitating all the same people that you see and hear over and over again everywhere. So what else? Yeah, I do want to receive feedback and constructive criticism, of course. Also, please send me requests for guests and topics. Again, that email was michael@scientifictriathlon.com. And that's Michael with a K. And some of the feedback that I have gotten about what makes you listen to the podcast week after week are the things that I mentioned above about great guests, and also that I'm not afraid to ask for specifics and challenge the guests a bit. So I want to keep improving on that front as well as an interviewer, and do more of that. So I hope that that's also one of the reasons that you enjoy the show, that you know that I'm going to challenge the guest if there's something that I believe that needs more clarification or whatever it is. Also, in the future, I will start to consider maybe bringing on some sponsors to offset the costs of the show, including both podcast hosting and website hosting, audio editing, and to some extent also, of course, to cover my time investment, which is huge, although I do love it. But if I bring on sponsors, it will only be the right sponsors that I really, really believe in, trust, and would feel confident endorsing to anybody. And I have come up with a test that would go for any sponsor, and my litmus test, if you will, and that would be, would I recommend this product to an athlete that I coach without having any sort of affiliation with it? And if I wouldn't, then that's not the right sponsor for the show. But you will notice if the time comes that I bring on sponsors, but there are costs related to having a podcast, so I hope to work on that. And if you are interested in sponsoring the show, please get in touch with me, and we can have a discussion. As I mentioned in today's episode and in previous interviews, I'll start to work full-time on Scientific Triathlon from October, and I'll move to Lisbon to do so. And my last day was actually just a few days ago on the 11th of August, and I will only work part-time in September. So I will also now have the ability to take on a few more athletes as coached athletes. And if you are interested in getting coached by me, please send me an email to michael@scientifictriathlon.com, and we can discuss more about it. I'm working on creating a webpage where I'll have more details, so I can just give you a link. But for now, please send me an email, and I can describe to you over email, or we can schedule a Skype or whatever you prefer. And I currently coach 8 athletes, and I'll cap my number of athletes to 15, even when I'm completely full-time. So if you are already sure that you want to be coached by me, then you might want to actually be quick and get in touch with me, since there are not too many slots available. Finally, this is a bit of a side note, but massive congratulations to one of the athletes that I coach, Marina, who just last week, by the time of this recording, gave birth to her first child, a little boy. He was a month early, so Marina was actually out on a 2-hour plus bike ride just, I think, 1 or maybe 2 days before, no, 1 day before going to the hospital and a couple of days before giving birth. So that is incredible. Massive congratulations and good luck to Marina and to the boy and to her husband, to the entire family, of course. That was it. I think we are most definitely coming up on time for this episode. I hope that you've enjoyed it a lot. And we'll be back in the next episode with a normal interview, and that will be with Patrick Cohn on mental self-sabotage that triathletes do and how to avoid it. In the meantime, remember to subscribe to the podcast and send me questions and feedback to my email, michael@scientifictriathlon.com, or Twitter @SciTriat. Thanks for sticking with me. Thank you so much for sticking with me for 50 episodes, and look forward to many, many more to come. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.